Hello everyone, this is the Iron Marshal speaking, and today I will be presenting you with my own little analysis of the war in Ukraine. In this video, I will be specifically analyzing the current situation of the war, the background of it, and where it is likely to proceed in the foreseeable future. Now, to get started, I will be reviewing various figures and statistics relating to the war in order to build a picture of what the current situation is on the ground. Now, to get started, we need to review the troop numbers. According to the Royal United Services Institute, as of May 2024, Russia has about 510,000 troops deployed in Ukraine. This is in contrast to around 500,000 to 800,000 active Ukrainian servicemen that Ukraine has at its disposal. Now, keep in mind that these figures are up for debate, as both sides have been relatively tight-lipped about any figures relating to their military capabilities. And on top of this, you also have to add in the effects of the fog of war, which means that any figures I present to you here are not likely to be very accurate. So, with that out of the way, let us review the figures that we do have available to us. Now, it has been claimed by Zelensky himself that around 31,000 Ukrainian soldiers have been killed in action. This is in contrast to around 120,000 Russian soldiers who have been killed in action out of a total of 315,000 Russian casualties. Now, there has been hot debate over the exact number of casualties, both on the Ukrainian side and the Russian side, though it is generally accepted that Russia has suffered much heavier casualties than Ukraine has. Now, it is also important to consider the economics of the war, specifically the capabilities of both sides to supply their armed forces. Now, according to Foreign Policy, Ukraine's annual drone production is between 1 and 2 million drones. Now, keep in mind these figures are very rough. Also, according to the Radio Free Europe, Russian annual shell production currently stands at between 4.5 to 5 million shells. Keep this latest figure in mind, because the war in Ukraine has been heavily oriented around artillery, as befits a Russian military doctrine that puts heavy emphasis on the use of heavy artillery. Now, it should be noted that Russia is significantly larger than Ukraine. That's a no-brainer. They have a much larger industrial base, and they have not relied on foreign aid to the degree that Ukraine has, although they have received outside support from countries like Iran, North Korea, and China. Now, another thing to consider is the overall effort both countries have invested into their armed forces and their war effort. Now, according to the Stockholm International Peace Research Institute, it's been estimated that in 2023, Ukraine's total military budget amounted to $64.8 billion. In the same year, Russia's military budget amounted to $109 billion. Now, please keep in mind, Ukraine is achieving these figures at much greater cost to itself. It's estimated that military expenditures at that time were consuming around 57% of all Ukrainian government expenditures. This is what you would characterize as an aspect of total war, an utter dedication to the war effort and the defense of the country. Now, these figures are all well and good. However, it is also important to consider the actual effect on the ground. Which side is winning, or at least which side is handling itself better overall. Now, I have compiled a list of key battles that I do believe are pretty good at seeing how the war is proceeding and painting a picture of where it's likely to go. These battles are the battles of Bakhmut, the battles of Avdiivka, and the current battle of Chasiv Yar. Now, Bakhmut has become rather infamous in the broader context of the Ukraine war. It lasted from July 2022 to May 2023 and ultimately resulted in what can best be described as a Pyrrhic Russian victory. Now, Bakhmut essentially set a pattern that would continue on to the present day. Russia, during this battle, relied heavily on brute force, essentially frontal assaults and relying on sheer weight of numbers to grind the Ukrainians down. Now, it was also in Bakhmut that you saw the emergence of the Wagner PMC, and it is estimated that around 21,000 Russian troops died in the Battle of Bakhmut, the vast majority of them being from Wagner. By comparison, the Ukrainian armed forces are predicted to have suffered around 25% of that number of casualties. Now, the strategic importance of this city is up for debate. Some say that it is an important logistics hub and that it could pave the way for the conquest of other settlements, in Bakhmut's case, Konstantinivka and Siversk, as it is connected to the highways that lead to those cities. However, it did come at enormous cost to the Russian forces, and this was a pattern that would continue on to the other battles. Moving on to Avdiivka, that lasted from October 2023 to February 2024. It did not last as long as Bakhmut, but it was still destructive. The Russian forces ultimately took the city, but again at enormous cost. It should be noted that in Avdiivka, there was significant reliance by the Russians on the use of artillery, upon aerial bombardment, and, at least towards the end of the battle, towards some degree of infiltration tactics. Now, securing Avdiivka is again of questionable strategic value. It has been debated exactly what impact the capture of Avdiivka would have had. However, one thing that is not contested is that the capture of Avdiivka ultimately helped secure the city of Donetsk, as the Ukrainians had used it to shell the city. Now, moving on to the Battle of Chasiv Yar. That has been going on since April 2024, and it is currently ongoing. Much like in Avdiivka, there has been a heavy reliance by the Russians on the use of frontal assaults, relying on brute force and sheer numbers to wear down the Ukrainians, who have currently been forced to divert more troops and brigades to that area in order to hold off the Russians. Furthermore, the Russians have been relying increasingly on the use of aerial bombardments, an advantage that they did not have at Bakhmut. However, progress has still been slow. It took 3 months for the Russian forces to take the Canal micro-district, which has been seen as a jumping-off point to the ultimate capture of Chasiv Yar. Now, again, strategic value, uncertain. Chasiv Yar rests on high ground, and it's believed that capturing Chasiv Yar will ultimately allow the Russian forces to progress onwards to the provincial capitals of Kramatorsk and Slovyansk. However, it is debated whether they will be able to achieve this, as the battles of Bakhmut and Avdiivka, which did ultimately result in the capture of those cities, did not yield spectacular results. Both towns were reduced to rubble, which seems to be the fate that awaits Chasiv Yar. Over the course of 2024, Russia has seized about 880 square kilometers of Ukraine. That landmass is equivalent to the area of the Pacific nation of Kiribati. Take that in for a second. All of that effort, tens of thousands of troops expended, and all Russia has to show for it is a couple hundred square kilometers of blasted landscape and destroyed towns. When you take this into consideration, it's no wonder that the Ukraine war has been frequently compared to World War I. You have enormous effort being expended, specifically by the Russians in this case, and for very little gain. That being said, it does seem to be the case that the current goal of the Russian military is not so much to take territory, but to grind down the Ukrainians. And this can partially be witnessed by Ukraine's manpower situation. In recent times, Ukraine has had to lower the minimum conscription age for its young men from 27 to 25, and there has been an initiative to recruit prisoners, a measure which was tried by Russia earlier on in the war. You could argue that Russia's main goal at this point has shifted from taking Ukraine in a territorial sense to simply bleeding it dry. And in this sense, I would say Russia has the advantage. They have a much greater industrial base, and they aren't at the mercy of their foreign allies. Because in Ukraine's case, should its major allies such as the US, the UK, France, or Germany decide to cut off support, its war effort would be crippled. Russia has had to rely on foreign assistance as well, but to a much less extensive degree. With this in mind, I feel that the most likely outcome for the Ukraine war at this point would be a Russian victory. A Pyrrhic Russian victory, but a victory all the same. And I think the ultimate result of that would be a permanent Russian occupation of the Crimea and the Donbass, consisting of the provinces of Luhansk, Donetsk, Zaporizhia, and Kherson. It might not be the ideal scenario for many people, and it would come as an immense disappointment and shock to the Ukrainian people who have fought so hard to repel the Russian invaders. However, the reality of politics is rarely a pleasant one. And with this in mind, I hope that I have provided some insight into the Ukraine war. This is the Iron Marshal, signing off. Remember to like and subscribe, and I'll see you next time.